So this is a video by a user BASSFZz. In this video, he critiques a guy who talks about a thesis which is very similar to the MGTOW thesis. And this is the reason why a part of this video is of interest. In that part of the video, we will try to review and look at the MGTOW thesis in light of the critique done by the uploader of the video in question. So let's go to the chase and get on with it. Let's begin.
I don't remember when I first heard it. There was something like 10 years ago, but I want to share the boat and island analogy because it's a fantastic way to understand how this world operates. You see, men are islands and women are boats. So what does this mean? Well, think of it this way. Every man lives alone on an island. He plants the trees that he likes. He builds the buildings that he wants. He spends his life shaping the island to be the perfect expression of his masculine creative energies. And he's happy there alone on his island. But women are not islands. They don't want to spend time by themselves, isolated, building their own lives. That's why women are boats. What they do is they hop on their boat and they sail through the water, ducking and weaving in between all of the islands, looking for one that looks enticing. If they see an island that they like, they'll dock their boat, they'll go on shore, and they'll live on the man's island for a little while. They'll try it out. If they like it, they'll stay. If they don't, they'll hop back on their boat and sail off again and try and find another island. What this means in the real world is that men are the ones who are creating the life that they want.
Now, let's say we take that analogy at face value and we accept it as literal. Let's say we accept this as true of women in general. Then I beg my friends the ultimate question, which is indeed the title of this video. Why would you want a woman? Legitimately. If this is the case, if this is our analogy, if this is how we're supposed to look at women, as basically a bunch of pirates or leechers who come to our island that we spend all of our time creating, looking at our resources, taking them for themselves, and then deciding they don't like the apple trees, they wanted peaches, so they leave my island with my apples that they just sampled after cutting down my trees to build whatever they wanted, their fort, their garden, or whatever. Cut down my trees to build an SOS so some other guy somewhere can save them. Let's look at the analogy that way. I have to ask, legitimately, why would you want a woman? And the only reasonable or logical explanation as to why you would want a woman is you fucking wouldn't. I mean, you can try your damnedest to tell me that you want a woman because your hormones is telling you that you need to put your dick inside something. You need to make your dick wet with the pussy juices of a woman. You can try to slide that to me, but honestly, considering the fact that there's so many other options of which you could do to get your penis wet with the pussy juices of a woman, and you can trick your body into obtaining those same exact hormones or those same exact experiences, if your only answer to that question is you only want a woman so you can put your dick inside of her, why invest any amount of your resources into her? Like, how fucking stupid is that? If we're supposed to look at women as like a lot of MGTOW, I'm not a taste. I read the comments. I know a lot of men here. They don't really like women all too much, okay? I know, I get it. Some of you guys, you're not big fans of the whole, other gender that we have. And I know some of you guys are MGTOW. You guys are like, why would I get married to I'm not even, no, fuck that. Why would you interact with a creature described as such? Now, you have to understand something, right? Like, there's a whole different audience or mindset that Alex is supposed to be portraying here, right? He's supposed to be giving us advice, not me, but other men, advice on how to get women or how to understand women or how to want women. But with an explanation like this, describing women as boats who come onto our islands, look at our resources, shop around at us, and then take our stuff and fucking leave, I have to ask, why would you want a woman? And even if that woman decides to stay, what did she bring to my island? A wet vagina, that's it? That's the most you get out of a woman, just simply sexual pleasure? What if she destroys your mind mentally and emotionally? Was all of that sex worth it then? I just don't even understand like what Alex was thinking here. Like how the fuck is that analogy appealing, or how is that going to entice anyone to spend any amount of time in trying to interact with and talk to women? And I don't have to imagine that anyone with any degree of common sense, or someone that has more strength in their mind and their character than just making their penis wet with vaginal juices, would have to say, no, I'm not gonna fucking spend my life improving it and making it better just so some woman who didn't do fuck all just comes over and just docks her boat and takes my stuff. That's ridiculous. And here's the thing, to be clear, I don't hate women. Again, I read the comments. I know a lot of people here, you guys aren't fans of women. But I'm not. I feel the total opposite. I love women. I like talking to women. I like looking at women. I like the women's voices. I like the way they look. I like women's eyes. I like women a lot. But I am not going to pretend that women in general don't do dumb shit. Like you'll know, like my video catalog is me complaining about the dumb shit thoughts do or women do or whatever. The fact that they destroy their children's lives all of the time. Look, I'm not gonna pretend that that stuff doesn't happen. But I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that I hate women in any capacity at all. I really don't. And I honestly don't have this opinion that most women are these leechers. Now, I know you got gold diggers. Like, there's a whole word for it, right? Or a colloquialism for it. I get it. And you've got women who are like this, who are just going to try to take your resources.
So we can see three separate questions here. The first question is about the guy's analogy and whether that analogy makes sense. Now, obviously, for the purposes of the video, BASSFZz kind of takes the analogy as true and then reasons from that about why would anyone who has those views would still want to date or still want to have a relationship with a woman. Now, this is generally called or can be referred to as a side critique because this is not critiquing the analogy of the person. This is not critiquing the views of the person directly. What it does is that it tries to show how the person who is professing these views does not appear to believe in those views themselves because his actions do not align with what seems to be the most logical outcome if such a person who had those views would be in the sphere of an action. So the first question obviously is whether the analogy that the guy gave makes sense or not. The second question is obviously the question present in the title of the video. Why would you even want a woman? And the third question, which is perhaps the most important question that culminates in the video's central message, is what does it tell us? This video, the critique by the guy or the original argument by the guy, and the critique by BASSFZz about this whole scenario regarding the relationship between what can be called the MGTOW community or the MRA community or any community that involves men and moderates and women. So there are three separate communities here. One is obviously of the women. One is of men who do not fall into the communities of men or the special communities of the men. And the third is obviously the special communities of the men. These are the people you will find that are on the same red pill side of the spectrum, be it they be MGTOWs or they be some MRAs or be they may be some PUAs. So these are the three groups, and we will be analyzing these three groups as we move on further in this video. So obviously to consider the first question, whether the guy's analogy is correct or not. Remember, an analogy does not need always to be 100% spot on. This is the reason why it is an analogy. It is a kind of a version of the original or the real thing, which other people can understand because it has less complex things associated with it. than the original thing. This is the purpose of the analogy. The thing that we are talking about, or the thing that is in the question, is complex, so it is compared to something that is rather simple. This is the reason why the critique of any analogy as being too simplistic is kind of redundant. The only critique of the analogy that actually comes is by pointing out how that analogy does not fit in the same perspective as the original argument that is being talked about. When we look at the societies in general, we see that the feminism or the female empowerment is only the issue in those countries which have good standards of life. Also, we see that feminism acquires into the imagination of those women who are relatively well off. The city women, the urban women who already have power to some of the other extent, who are relatively well off. In those countries, which again are relatively well off, they form the main class, the feminist class. And this should get the person thinking if indeed it is true that feminism has any genuine complaint, then the most obvious women would be the most complaining. Now, some of the people try to undercut this argument by pointing out that the reason why women who are in the oppressive regimes or who are in more patriarchal regimes do not complain so much is because they have no power. But the reason why this doesn't make sense is because even in those countries in which they have power, for example, take USA, you'll have an urban side and you will have a rural side. You'll find that the feminism actually advocates for those things with way more gravity that are very less consequential for the women who are actually facing any sort of hardship in their life. And this is mind boggling because in this case we are talking about women who are at least to some extent emancipated. And even if they are not, the emancipated women should actually fight for the rights of the women who are most emancipated. But what we see most often is the critique of the moral attitudes, the critique of the privileges that are so frivolous, and if they are existent, then they are so much less as compared to the hardships that some of the women who are, let's say, not in the urban climate would be facing. What is the reason behind this? Well, the reason behind this is very simple. The reason behind this is when any nation prospers, women realize that they don't have to be dependent on men to get the benefit of the resources. And this is the reason why they start arguing for a share in those resources. This is the reason why you won't see women fighting so much for the right to die in the military, but right to work in the offices, especially those offices that offer that have that will offer or jobs that will offer a good salary and will have working conditions that are pretty easy to work in. The reason why women perhaps didn't argue for equal right to employment and equal amounts of employment before was because the jobs were not easy, but now most of the jobs involve sitting in a room in air conditioner earning 5 or 6 figure salary, or at least a salary which is pretty high compared to what rest of the people of the nation of the other nations earn. Even if you are kind of a middle class person in USA, you are so rich compared to what people in over all over the world earn. And the same is the case with the Europe. This is why it is not surprising that women find those jobs pretty emancipating because those jobs provide women with a good life standard. But if indeed the complaint about employment was really genuine, or the complaint about unemployment, we would see women with the same vigor protesting to be coal miners, or to be working in third world countries, or to be working in dangerous jobs. The idea that men create the world and then women try to gather in the most resources in the best way possible for themselves not only makes sense from the evolutionary perspective, but it seems kind of true. And the reason why it seems kind of true is because of the argument that females give or the feminists give. which show that they have a strong preference while advocating for the poor or for the marginalized. They have a strong preference to occupy those positions that are occupied by rich and powerful people. And this will get you in surprise because even after the reign of feminism for years, what we hear most about is the women not being able to get into board of directors or not earning as high enough, which is surprising because a core component of the feminism also hates rich people, but it also wants to project and force women into positions that it itself considers immoral and too much capitalistic. And the reason for that is simply because while women have this view, which is related to a very different concept of trying to distribute resources or analyzing resources, and is kind of socialist or left leaning in many cases. But women still want the share of the resources. Perhaps that is the thing that makes women vote leftist much more than what men vote. And that is because women know the fact that use of the government power or use of the other means of power rather than just pure hard work is actually the better means for them to gain resources. And this is not controversial, and this is something that you see often. For example, shifting funds towards themselves and their problems, like breast cancer, or shifting the funds to domestic violence shelters that are specifically built for the women, or to any number of the causes which support women, even abortions, even uh, pretty cheap products that prevent reproduction, that prevent pregnancy. And the reason for that is because women know the fact that this is a better way for them to extract resources by showing themselves as marginalized rather than doing the hard work because it is hard by definition. And this is the reason why women have done it and have been successful at it. This shows that to some extent the analogy is spot on because the analogy correctly identifies a very crucial factor, which can be called the crucial biological factor, which is this: the world that women live in is actually created by the males. And the males have had all the power to reflect or to define the basic core foundational ideology of the worlds that we live in. Even in the case of many feminists, you see many men who act as the philosophical leaders of the movement. You see men pushing feminism. And the reason for all of that is because men form the basic core structure of the society, even if it is a feminist society. What women do is basically act activists in them. Just like the argument goes, or the traditional wisdom goes, men create houses and women create homes. But how is the home created from the house? The home is created from the house by means of personalizing what is an impersonal thing and trying to formulate a set of or a series of systematic structure of the resources that are present inside the house. This is what makes the house a home, or this is something that we hear about the organizational stuff that everyone keeps on talking about or joking about when they are regarding when they regard the status of a bachelor compared to the status of a married person. All of this is because women's affinity to resources, and that is very crucial from the perspective of evolution because in order to maintain themselves and in order to maintain their progeny, women needed to have that mentality. If you believe in evolution, you will understand why this makes sense. And this also makes sense from the perspective of mate selection. Because women would be thus more valuable than men because they inherently carry the seed for the next generation. And if reproduction is considered to be the goal of evolution, then to maximize the potential for the transfer of gene from one generation to another, one would have to have that attitude, and that is biological in nature. This is what the MGTOWs argue. Now, the problem that occurs here is that people take offense to it, especially those that have a type of religious upbringing that teaches them that no one is inferior and no one is superior. that all men are created equal. And the problem with that is the fact that women have a high affinity to resources and protection may grant them the term gold digger, but any positive or the negative spin on it doesn't change the biological fact. The reason why people become upset at the use of the term gold digger is because they see it as something negative and they want to show the world that they don't actually hate women. But in their hearts, every person believes that women or knows for the fact that a woman had higher affinity to the resources. How do we know that? We know that from observing the simple laws that have been present in the society. For example, take the law regarding the alimony. The concept of alimony was present in the traditional societies as well when the traditionalists were in power. And the reasoning behind it was simply that when the woman marries a man, there is a component of that which is related to the resources. And that is something which should be afforded to women in case the marriage breaks up. So even if the marriage breaks up, man is getting nothing from the woman, which is extra. After the marriage, the woman would be able to get resources from the man, which would be able to maintain the life of the woman. And that is based on the reasoning, which is that women do marry in part to get the resources of the man. Now, there are two counter arguments to it, and let's analyze them. The first counter argument to it talks about the fact that the reason why alimony laws were established was because that they are neutral, and the reason why they were established, uh, if by any reason, to benefit women was because that the woman couldn't work. But the problem with that statement is that there are two things that disprove that statement. Firstly, that uh, the alimony laws have been the subject of attention even in those societies in which women had the right to work, and they are even now when women have so much freedom to work. And in few cases, women are graduating colleges at a higher rate than the men. They have very close employment rates to men, especially unmarried women, so it makes no sense to continue alimony further. But still, alimony forms a great chunk of the argument. The second thing to consider is the doctrine of the similar standard or the same standard. For long, people have held that when any relationship breaks up or when there is any divorce that happens, not only the party, and this is based on the perspective that the party which is aggrieved would be the woman, would get a share in the resources, but her life has to be maintained at the same standard as it was before. This very notion that is used in the code, that is accepted by the court, shows that it is not just about the resources or the contribution of the woman into the relationship, but it's about maintaining the same standard of life which she wanted and for which she married the person. And the reason for it is that because people know the fact that women exchange essentially their youth for the money. And because they exchange their youth for the money, the person that they got on with is the highest thing that they had got. And that should continue because this is actually their real value. And the value is not calculated by the actual contribution that the woman makes, but how high up a man she could get, or how high up a man on the money scale or the wealth scale she could get. Now, this is something that will tell you pretty easily that this idea that the women in many cases marry for resources is not something that is a fringe idea. The only time that it's pretended to be a fringe idea is when people are talking about its negative association with gold digging and such. And this is where the situation gets very dicey. Because think of it from this perspective. The problem with this argument, or the problem with assuming that any form of negative association with this thing should be considered bad, is that because of this fact that the men and women have different goals while marrying, there are differences in marriages or differences in the rules regarding marriages. that would be beneficial for each gender. For example, because men and women code each other differently, a standard rule would be either harmful for the men or would be harmful for the woman. This is the reason why an egalitarian standard of a marriage would simply not suffice. Because in order for it to suffice, men and women have to be equal partners in the marriage, which is almost never the case. Now, people can say that they are complementary and equal in that respect, but being different mean different challenges. And this is the reason why egalitarianism in marriage has completely destroyed marriage. But keeping that aside, the idea that we should try to suppress it because it is suppress the fact that women have a higher affinity for the resources in marriages because it is associated with gold digging actually prevents the real conversation from being held. And it is also not untrue that women have higher affinity for the resources. And even moderates are beginning to point this out. For example, in the video by Tim Pool, in a video, he points out how a study which shows that more than the third of women lie for free food on dates. Now, this is not a small majority. Uh, this is not a small number. Rather, this is a very large number, 33%. And let me remind you, is just one single thing. There are several different ways, right? And perhaps if we account them all, the number will rise up so fast. The only reason why this number appears to be significant, but less than 50% seems to be because there is only one factor which is being considered. Now, it may be, let's assume that the number doesn't go higher than that. It is 33%, but it is still a pretty significant number. And these are the women who admitted to it. There are many women who perhaps would not admit to it, or perhaps would not explicitly even think of themselves as using the dates for free food. In any case, even looking at the statistics, even looking at how women define their preferences, even looking at how the marriages are formed, and even looking at the fact that the women prefer generally the partners who earn more than them, we know the fact that the gold digging concept is actually true. Whether you associate it positively or negatively is a different thing. Just think of it, right? There was recently an article, and the link would be in the description, which talked about how women are not finding men who they can marry because of the fact that the men are not earning enough. But just think of it for a moment. Men have been marrying women who are not earning and would be essentially an economic liability in terms of pure economic calculation for centuries, for millenniums. Why can't women marry men who earn less than them? Why they feel so problematic? It's so problematic. And the reason is that the instinct, even if the women are earning high or pretty good, the instinct kicks in, which demands that the woman seek those partners that earn more than them, that are superior to them in that respect. And this is exactly how the women frame the discussion, the dating discussion. And we can talk about the superiority and inferiority for us, but this is the based on which the women base their decisions. This is also true that women generally want men who are higher up on the scale or on the dating scale. They have higher expectations than men. And this is something that we observe from observing the statistics on the dating sites. So, this idea that women perhaps are going through different men and trying to pick the best one according to them is actually kind of true. And comparing them to boats coming on the island, wherein the island represents a society and the boats represent the travelers, the migratory travelers who are looking for the best island, seems to be more true than not. And that is only what is needed in an analogy. Now, let's just quickly jump to the second point, which is the title of this video. Why would you even want a woman? And the answer is simple. Yeah, the reason for any want is biological. The reason why someone may like ice cream, the reason why someone may like specific kinds of video games or toys is because there is a need for that, or there's a habit for that. But let's focus on the need because need is what makes the habit. So people have need, they have biological instincts, and this is something that they will pursue, and they are pretty strong. Now, one of the things that BASSFZz points out is that there are very many ways that are available now in which the men can stimulate the sexual experience without having sex with real women. He's kind of right, but the reason why those are not applicable is because they are not highly developed so as to mirror the real experience completely. And along with them, there's a notion, right, or there's a knowledge that this is fake, and that itself keeps the full experience away. And we see it because one of the questions that he asks is why would men, if they really, really, really just believe that the women are only good and the sexual pleasure, would pursue these women? Now, you may call this an irrational instinct, and in some sense, yes, it is irrational, but the point is that it is actually true. From Xerxes' own video, from the guy's own video, we know that when he tries or when he criticizes thoughts, the question that should be raised or should be pointed out here is why does he think that the men who are coding these hoes or, code, or to say more politely eagles on the internet are coding these eagles on the internet? Now, some would say that they are doing it for a relationship, and that is partly true. But don't they realize in their minds that the woman who is actually bearing it all for hundreds and thousands of the people on the stream is not a perfect example of someone who they would want to be in a relationship with, because if that all of that continues in the future, that will not be perfectly exclusionary or exclusive. The point is, you may say that those men are irrational, but that is just a fact. The fact is that even when men know the fact that women, the only thing that few women could provide them is sexual pleasure, they still pursue them because it is filled in the instincts of the men. And it is filled in the instincts of men precisely for the reason to carry on the next generation, to carry on or to bring about the next generation. And we see it again and again. We see the woman, and this is the important point, right? The reason why models and actresses and porn stars are more popular than women in sports or women in any other fields is because of the reason that men value them more. But men know for the fact that they cannot have the relationship with the actress, right? Or most men cannot have that. Or with the porn star, and they know that that stuff is kind of sexual. The attraction is mostly sexual. But they still pursue them. And now you may call that irrational, but it persists and is present in all men. Now, BASSFZz tries to link it with the lack of moral character and strength. But the issue there with that statement is that it would be a lack of a moral character and strength related to something. And what is that thing? Now, he may try to he may be imagining two sets of men. One set of men who have these negative views of women but cannot prevent them from pursuing these women. But the other set of men are not those men who have these views and are not pursuing women because they can be said to have a better moral character or more strength. The other group of the men are those men who do not have these views. One of them is BASSFZz himself, and who are pursuing women. So the question of moral character does not come into place. This is the question about the facts. If you do not believe that the person on the other side is bad, you obviously have to have no moral character to restrain or prevent a relationship from, with that person. If you have a strong desire to pursue a relationship with that person, only when your intellect and your heart are at odds with each other the true question of moral character comes into the play. So the question about this moral character, the moral character is actually not valid because it is a question of relative moral character and the relative strength. So yes, compared to the people who have these views about the women and are not pursuing relationship, they have they can be said to have a relatively stronger or more moral character than the people who have these views and are pursuing relationship with the woman. But it is all relative and it is not in this case a standard which is absolute because there is no way to measure it on the absolute scale. In any case, let's come to the third point, which perhaps culminates all of the discussion, the MGTOW thesis. The question which BASSFZz asks is, and which is perhaps the most pertinent question, is how this knowledge or how this analogy will make women, will make men pursue these women. Because if the men have negative views of the woman, they should not pursue the woman. So what Alex is doing is he's undercutting his own argument. The problem with that is that he does not understand the MGTOW claim. The issue that the MGTOW say is the current and the modern state of affairs is that it tries to pop those things as true, which aren't. So the criticism of the marriage is not because the marriage is the way that it is, but it is that people pretend that marriage is something different. But in reality, it is this. Just like people pretend that family codes are different. Just like the people pretend that men have so much power in the society right now. The question that the MGTOWs are raising is not just that the society is in a very dire state or the marriage has been destroyed, but the fact that the marriage is pretended to be what it is not. That women are pretended to be what they are not. We know from the fact that we have very absurd rates of divorce in the West. We have high rates of adultery, and that is when we have independence to be fornicators, to select a partner in every way possible, and to also be able to pursue different types of relationships. Even then, such is really the case. And the MGTOW's main question: if the marriage is in such a dire state position, then it makes no sense to marry. And the people who are making people or convincing people to marry are presenting marriage um, in a way that is not actually true. They are trying to emphasize those things that are positive, but actually are present in very little quantity, and they are trying to suppress the negative things associated with the marriage, or with family codes, or with the children, men being able to keep the children, etc. If you show true statistics, a rational and a reasonable man would at least, uh, by the force of his intellect, would not want to marry. His heart or desire may make him marry or make him pursue these relationships. But if he is smart and reasonable, at least in his mind he would understand that marriage is not a good option. People may pursue those things that they think uh, are foolish because their heart desires and MGTOWs are not different from other people or men who do similar kind of things. But the difference is pointing out the actual statistics, pointing out the actual facts. And if you point out the actual facts, the MGTOW thesis is that the most reasonable and rational people would reject marriage at least intellectually or reject any long-term relationship with women intellectually. The reason why this distinction is important is because now the emphasis of few of the MGTOWs is that once when you realize what the relationship is actually about, you can perform better in that relationship and not act foolish by over investing. When you regard the actual mindset of the woman, you can approach a relationship better, and thus you can avoid the trap which would be set up in the society. This is the reason why pointing out these things is important. If the man knows, for example, that women have the nature that they will jump on from one island to the other, they will not try to overinvest in one relationship. Now, in that sense, it is beneficial because it presents men a way of defending themselves from any extra liability that they might have if they act in relationship thinking something which is not true. If they understand the fact that yes, women have a higher affinity for resources, and almost everyone in the society knows that. They believe that the woman should be kept at a certain standard and they should be provided with welfare, with resources at the expense of men. When the MGTOWs or when the people who are marrying would realize this, they will take at least few precautions, and that is what makes the most sense. That is something that a lot of men need. They need, if it is true, the truth, and as such, keeping away them from truth from them is not helpful in any regards. Now, the reason why this becomes a problem is because pointing out the truth points out to several deficiencies in women from the perspective of the male morality, and some males cannot stand it. They would criticize women, but they would not wish to associate certain negative terms with women. And for different people, it might be different. But the fact remains that that is actually true. You may try to pretend that that is not really the case, but it is really the case. And this is the reason why the relationships are screwed. The relationships in the modern world do not make any sense. And the reason why they don't make sense is not because of men. The feminism is behind this. And who are the torch bearers of the feminism? Who are the supposed beneficiaries of the feminism? It is the woman. The reason why people don't want to admit it completely, to realize the fact that whether they have positive or the negative views, it is granted fact that women have a higher affinity for resources, and this is how the society has been structured from time immemorial. It's surprising why people would try to avoid that conclusion when it is so present, so much present in their field, especially in this world, where you would see women complaining about small things and trying to extract more and more money for their causes from the government, from the men, from the taxpayer. All of this makes you wonder where is the problem occurring? It's entirely clear, and it is not even a question that while pursuing a relationship, men and women look at the qualities in their partners that are not exactly similar. And if they are not exactly similar, you may have a good view of the quality of the way the women approach a relationship from the way men approach a relationship. But you will have to admit that they are different. And if they are different, then from the perspective of some of the people, they would be immoral. If they have a standard that is based on those factors that are contradictory to how one of the gender may approach a relationship. And people may say, okay, we are not considering that. People may try to throw the criticism away, but that does not help because it keeps the reality away from the people. It's as unhelpful as feminism in solving any issue that makes sense and is pertinent. And this is something to be realized. The crucial reason why men have moved to from stable and strong relationships to relationships that are more temporary is because that they have realized that over investing in women is not a good option. And the reason why they have realized that is because with sexual liberation, they know for the fact that the woman can uh, simply choose the next partner. And this is the reason why over investment is a bad idea because you have an investment into a relationship for let's say 10 or 15 years, and then you simply realize that the woman has just moved on and there is no way that you can get the benefit of your resources back to you. The law doesn't help, the courts don't help, the society doesn't help either. And this is the reason why men have naturally begun to shy away from the long term and stable relationships, even though many women want that, especially after they hit the wall. And the reason for this distinction is precisely this. It's because men actually, to some effect, know the truth. And the thesis of the MGTOW is validated in the actions of men from all walks of life, whether they be PUA, whether they be Christian, whether they be on the side of the left, whether they be on the side of the right. We see the marriage rates have declined all over the place. And the reason for that is because the MGTOW thesis is validated. While people may sit on the camera and say again and again that they don't think that all women are like that. The reason why the things have changed dramatically because people instinctively realize that if not all, most of the women are like that. And you may take it positively, you may take it negatively, you may take it in a neutral way. But this is just a fact. And if that is a fact, you will have to realize it and adjust according to it. And this was the main argument of the feminists as well, or the main point that the men will have to adapt to the new world that the women were creating, and you cannot escape from it. The problem with the group that I see that tries to present these arguments in which it critiques the woman, or tries not to understand the actual reality or the way the society works, is because it wants to hold women responsible. The people sit on the camera and they make interesting and good points. But at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is they are trying to ascribe agency to the woman. But that is not the way. Even if that is true, based on the religious and moral philosophy, that is not the way the society works. No society has ever attributed agency to the woman. And many people want to say that the women were held accountable for their actions in the past. That is also not true. Let's take the case of abortion. The reason why people were against abortion and were pro-life was not because women were held accountable to their actions, and this is the reason why that argument does not work. The reason why men were pro-life or the people were pro-life was because that they had a different sense of morality, and when the morality evolved or changed, they stopped being pro-life. But neither the women were being held accountable then, nor they are now. What has changed is the moral foundation for the men who have developed the society. So, in the more freedom based society, which were again developed by the Enlightenment thinkers, mostly who were men, liberty is paramount. And that liberty, even if it comes at the expense of the death of the fetus, it should be snatched. For the people who are more of the traditionalist mindset, a life is very important because it comes from the God Himself. And this is the reason why the life of the fetus must be protected. This is a moral change. This change has not come because the women have prevented themselves from being held responsible, or that they are now being more responsible. The feminist side and the anti-feminist side, when they both fight for the question of the agency of the woman, they are both committing the same mistake and falling into the same trap. The reason why the BASSFZz has to point out so many double standards that are applicable in the society, which treat men as agents but do not treat women as agents, is not because of feminism, but it is because of precisely this reason that, from the perspective of the society and the way the social interactions work, women will never be ascribed agency. This is the reason why we have a differentiation even in when men are the victims of domestic violence or they are the victims of sexual assault or rape. And the reason for that is because, not because people don't take domestic violence or sexual assault seriously. At least they pretend that they take these things seriously. The reason for that the reason why you have to fight now, again, extra, to remove the standard from the society regarding the sexual assault of men or the domestic violence against men, even when the society has already been sensitized. to domestic violence against women or the sexual assault against women is because there's actually a natural response of treating men different than women. You may try to ascribe agency to women all day long, but this is not how the society thinks, and you will always be on the fringe side. And thus, soft, um, and thus your views, because they will never be gain prominence because they don't align with the reality, even though that they may be moral or correct according to uh, a theological standpoint or religious standpoint, not hold to the scrutiny of the real world, and as such will never be realized in practice, and thus no one better form their opinions or base their lifestyles or determine risks and rewards of a particular act or a situation based on them, because this is not how the society will act, because this is not how their arguments will fly and make sense. The arguments that will make sense would be of different nature and character, and not the arguments which try to stress on the agency of the woman, because it seems that the natural instinctive thinking is the fact that men are ascribed more agency than the woman in any relationship or in any one-to-one exchange between the two. And because of that, no matter which type of society you have, either the right or the left, will face the same issue with the population. And that forms the crux of the whole MGTOW thesis. The biological realities are before the social realities come into the picture, and as such, anything that is biologically true cannot be avoided by mere argumentation and reasoning. You cannot reason people into thinking something which their whole biology tells is not true. You may brainwash some of them, but that is the best you can get. And understanding this is how we can move forward and solve the issues that are plaguing the civilization, and not by any other means.